And Sherwin, looking at those elections, as we mentioned earlier on, it's just 4 more days and we will be seeing the United States voting for the next president, and that is between Hillary Clinton as well as that very controversial businessman Donald Trump. Now, to talk through some of the issues raised during the run-up to the election and both campaigns, we are now joined by Professor Patrick Bond from the Wits University School of Governance and Professor John Stemla, also from Wits University's International Relations Department, who's joining us via Skype. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on Your World.
Thanks. Great to be with you.
I'm actually glad that you were here now to listen to that discussion between my colleagues earlier on. But I guess a good question would be, how exactly does the US presidential election work?
Well, it is, as you see, a toss-up really between 2 candidates. There are 2 others. Gary Johnson, who's a libertarian, getting about 5% in the polls. Jill Stein, who's a Green Party with a strong radical progressive in the Bernie Sanders tradition, around 3-4%. So they're not factors, except they may pull enough in, as Sherwin said, the swing states, Florida, North Carolina, that like 2000 when Ralph Nader had a similar position, it's really up to these 2 candidates to take a very small part of an undecided group of voters and try and win them over. And that's why these October surprises are so important. The FBI coming out, Julian Assange's leaks of the emails from John Podesta, the Hillary Clinton surrogate. These are really important moments where we understand a lot more about power politics, the crony capitalism that makes that country tick.
Professor Stemla, I'd like to bring you into the discussion now. Professor Bond mentioned the surprises that we've seen, the FBI and that letter, and also some of the things we've seen with Trump, for example, the sexual harassment accusations that were leveled against him. What does this mean for this race at this late stage?
Well, it's a little hard for me to hear your exact question about the difficulties facing Secretary Clinton in her struggle with Donald Trump, but I think the reference to the third party is almost beside the point right now because of the fundamentals of the election, and it looks as though Clinton can take the win both by the Electoral College and by the popular vote, although in America, with 50 states each having its own voting process, the gaming of this polling really means that we're going to have to wait till the 8th next Tuesday to know what the public actually thinks. But the fundamentals for her remain as they have been for the last 2 or 3 months. This election has settled down much more than the noise in the media would suggest, in my view, because I've looked at all of the data, and it seems to me that the fundamentals are still with her demographically, and that she should win on Tuesday. If that's not the case, we're in an entirely new ballgame, and South Africa better reassess its economic policies, as Cyril Ramaphosa was talking about earlier in your show.
The economic policies and what the implications of either candidate winning will be?
Well, it's very mixed because the short-term dangers include war, and Hillary Clinton will probably go to war faster. She's already threatened in Syria an air war that would bring a conflict with Russia. Also, how either candidate might handle the next big financial crash, because we saw in 2008 the Democrats and the Republicans really bent over backwards to Wall Street to bail them out. The longer-term danger to South Africa and to Africa is definitely climate change, and Trump is a denialist. He just doesn't think it's a problem or it's caused by China. I mean, he's got a range of theories and he won't do anything. Clinton is a little more sophisticated, again taking a very pro-corporate perspective and running a kind of politics of climate that's consistent with the financial industry, especially carbon trading. And I think in that sense, either choice is really a problem for South Africa. I think the US citizenry know that they've got 2 bad candidates. These are the 2 most unpopular candidates in I think in any polling history in the country. So it's a mess, and it means, I think, whatever happens, Washington will be a little weaker, and it'll be important for countries like South Africa and people's movements, climate movements, economic justice movements to speak up, because whoever occupies the White House will be the enemy of these people.
Professor Stemla, we've got Professor Bond here saying that the United States knows that they've got 2 bad candidates. Would you say it's a case of the winner being the best of the worst because, well, there's no one else?
Well, for me, this is the most perplexing election in my lifetime, and I'm an old guy, in the sense that Donald Trump has had absolutely no experience and is fact-free in his presentations. Indeed, the question I get most often from South Africans is how can Hillary Clinton, who is an experienced public servant, be losing to a mentally unstable, megalomaniac, racist, sexual predator who doesn't pay income taxes? It really is a stark choice and a very big risk for the rest of the world. Now, Professor Bond and I might have a good policy discussion about whether or not Clinton would be more hawkish than, say, Barack Obama. But compared to the totally inexperienced, narcissistic, and untested and really bizarre candidate that Donald Trump presents, and he's tapping into a bigotry in America, which is long-standing and a subject of concern for Americans and for the rest of the world. But his lack of policy experience would lead, I think, to an uncertainty in markets and in generally the security regime that has evolved that you can't even change if you've got no there in Washington. And he would not be in any way a reliable partner for anyone, whether it's the Russians or the Chinese or the South Africans. It's really a bizarre situation if he was to be elected. I don't think it's going to happen, but then if Clinton gets elected, we can argue policy. With Trump, all bets are off.
Professor Bond, let's look at the U.S. voter. What are the different types of voter profiles in the U.S. and how do they influence the election outcomes, especially that all-important undecided voter? We keep hearing analysts mentioning the undecided voter. We're 4 days away from the elections. Does it even matter now? Are the undecided voters still in existence?
Well, yes, and it's really about the passion of those who are decided, because a great many, especially the younger people who would normally be Democratic Party supporters who would vote for Clinton, actually are feeling a little queasy and are potentially not going to go out and vote. So whether it's undecided, which is a very small proportion at this stage, or people who just don't have the willpower to go and cast their ballot. And that brings us to the big question. I think John's exactly right, that the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, actually, to his credit, he's not explicitly homophobic. I should have said xenophobic, because he's obviously said to Muslims and to Mexicans, you're not welcome in the US. And that means that the white working class voter, who is really the critical base of Donald Trump's support, and it's the non-college educated voter in their polls, are very strongly in favor of Trump, because he's saying to them that specifically trade, people have lost jobs because of inflows of manufactured goods, especially from China, so factories have shut, and that he will make America great again by going out and giving him jobs. John's right, he's fact-free and he doesn't have a particularly good plan, but once he unleashes that demon of, I spent last week in the United States, and you can just feel that tension, that rumbling of the sort of angry white male, and it's an awful sight. And as you know, with KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, with the long traditions of lynching, of racism that have continued, the often white cops shooting innocent black citizens. These are difficult times for the psyche of the United States, and Donald Trump will make this such a divided society that I think we'll just look at that place and say, we'll welcome exiles, frankly. I mean, this is the next question. If Trump wins, would it be time for sanctions against the United States? It'll be a very difficult place.
Professor Stromla, I want you to come into this discussion on the type of voter that we will see going out on Tuesday, and some of the voters that have already voted in the earlier votes. Now, earlier analysis saw Hillary Clinton being supported by the African-American voters, as well as obviously the female voters, and maybe the youth vote as well. Can you take us through some of the differences between the two in terms of who is likely to vote for which candidate?
Well, it's a complicated story. I'll try to be simple. There is in the United States 50 separate elections, don't forget, because of the federal system. And so Clinton has to strategize each state somewhat differently in order to put together a national majority of those states, as well as the popular majority, but there could be a split between the 270 electoral votes required under the Electoral College versus the popular vote. She has put together a coalition that Obama helped start, recognizing that America is becoming a non-white majority country by the middle of the century. More non-white babies were born this quarter than white babies were in the U.S. This is a fundamental change. She's a cosmopolitan person who wants to pull together the Asians, the African Americans, and the Hispanics, as well as the youth and the college educated. What Trump is appealing to, as Patrick just said, is the losers or the dead-enders now, the white males who have not got college education, but still constitute a big segment, and perhaps along with the complicitous Republican establishment, maybe comprise 40% of the population. But most of the states are declaring themselves either Republican or Democrat in the last several elections. And she's really fighting over a few swing states, as he is. It looks as though she is winning thanks in part to the not just African Americans who aren't voting as strongly as they did in the early voting for Barack Obama, but in particularly Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and above all, women. If it was just a woman's election, she would win going away with about a 20% advantage. White males still prefer Donald Trump and his machismo. This is very much a mandate on bigotry, this election, and it's not just on race, it's also very much on gender. And I think the firewall for her are women voters, but that's my view.
Prof, Hillary may just be the first female president of the United States. Would you say Americans have fully embraced this?
Well, yes, and I think the fact that Barack Obama was the first African American, which I didn't think would happen in my lifetime. I think these are moments where the socio-cultural maturing of a pretty backward society is very, very healthy. However, I think to John's points about gender and ethnicity, let's just recall that on class politics, which is also the case around the world. We saw this with Brexit, where the white working class of Britain were feeling besieged and voted to get out of the EU in July. And these moments when you have declining economy, the economy in the US is growing, they won't raise interest rates, one would hope, because there's growth, but it's growth that doesn't really trickle down. The top 1% have been taking virtually all of the new wealth since 2008. That's statistically very clear. So I don't know if John would agree with me, but while Hillary Clinton has done secret speeches to Goldman Sachs, the texts have only just recently been released, while she lines up again and again for free trade and said in secret that's what she supports, although publicly she's had to take a different point of view. This is a candidate who's raising over $1 billion, probably closer to $2 billion. And the question is, like we have in this country, is there state capture? Who is she captured by? What interest of Wall Street has she and her husband, ex-President Bill Clinton, been succumbing to, especially as they raise so much money for the Clinton Foundation? This is what gives an aura that there is a corporate elite in the United States that I think a lot of people have been rebelling against.
Professors, unfortunately, we've run out of time. There is so much to discuss, but the time won't allow. Thank you so much for joining us on Your World. That was Professor Bond as well as Professor Strumlau from Wits University talking to us about those US elections just 4 days away. We'll have more for you on that after.